was supposed to leave Tucson at noon, but the last day of school before spring break had been hectic, so I didn't get on the road until nearly dinner time. I packed enough snacks, chips, beef jerky, a couple of candy bars, figuring it would keep me going on the long haul to my parents' place in Santa Fe. Normally the drive isn't too terrible, maybe 6 or 7 hours if traffic cooperates. But I was pushing it. By the time I got to the outskirts of Phoenix, the sun was already dipping low, staining the sky with that dusky orange glow you only see in the Arizona desert. I'm 32 years old, an elementary school teacher, and I don't spook easily. Kids surprise you every day. Random tantrums, weird drawings, stories about imaginary friends. But I wasn't prepared for what happened on Route 19 that night. I remember flipping through radio stations, trying to find something decent, then giving up and connecting my phone to listen to an audiobook. The desert was calm. No wind, no tumbleweeds blowing across the blacktop, just miles of open road and distant silhouettes of cacti. By the time I passed the sign that read, Santa Fe, 360 miles, I was down to less than half a tank of gas. I was making a mental note to fill up at the next decent-looking gas station when I noticed a pair of headlights approaching fast from behind. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it was some kind of SUV. Dark-colored, maybe black or charcoal, nothing unusual at first, just another driver speeding along. But it pulled up behind me too close, hugging my bumper for no apparent reason. I tapped my brakes lightly to hint, "Hey, back off," but it stayed there, practically breathing down my neck. A flicker of annoyance turned into a gnawing sense of worry when the SUV didn't try to pass. I shifted in my seat and checked the clock on the dash. It was close to 9 p.m. The road was pretty empty. The next exit was a few miles ahead, and I figured maybe this driver was just impatient and would zoom right by when I slowed down. So I gently eased off the gas, turned on my blinker, and rolled onto the exit ramp. The highway lights behind me receded until all I saw was desert gloom, a single gas station sign glowing faintly in the distance. But the SUV followed me, mirroring every turn of the steering wheel. My heart gave a little jump in my chest. I told myself it could be a coincidence. Maybe they needed gas too. I reached the station. It was one of those old mom-and-pop places, the sign flickering in that tired neon sputter. There were 2 pumps, both ancient enough that they still had flip-numbered displays. A single fluorescent lamp buzzed overhead, creating a halo of light that left the edges of the lot in near darkness. The place was empty. No other cars. No clerk visible through the grease-smudged windows. I pulled up to the pump, cut the engine, and sat there for a second, waiting to see if the SUV would continue on. Instead, it swung into the lot behind me and parked on the far side, maybe 30 feet away. The driver's window was tinted dark. I couldn't make out any faces. My pulse throbbed in my ears, but I tried to play it cool. I got out, started pumping gas, and stole a glance at the SUV. The engine was still running, headlights off, but I could hear that low rumble. Another minute passed. The pump was old and slow, so I tapped my foot, mentally urging it to hurry. My phone chirped. Low battery. Of course it was. I fished out my wallet, jammed it into my back pocket, and felt an urge to go inside to pay and maybe buy a fresh soda. But the thought of leaving my car under that flickering light, with that SUV parked there, set my nerves on edge. I decided to stay put, keep my eyes open. Once the tank was full, I replaced the nozzle, hopped back in, and started the engine. My gut said to peel out of there, but I forced myself to drive away calmly. Maybe they were just resting, or maybe they were waiting for someone. It didn't have to be about me. I pulled onto the state road again, merging onto Route 19. There was a dull emptiness stretching ahead and behind, no cars for miles, until the SUV's headlights snapped on in my rearview mirror. It was definitely the same one. The license plate was caked with dirt, unreadable from a distance. My hands started sweating on the steering wheel. I tried to rationalize it. This is a free country. They can drive wherever they want. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The SUV hung back a few car lengths, never attempting to pass. Occasionally I'd see it swerve slightly, like the driver was adjusting, deciding something. 15 minutes rolled by like that, the tension building in my chest. The route took a sharp curve around a rocky outcrop. I used that moment to speed up, hoping to lose them. I pressed the accelerator harder than I should have, the needle climbing to 70, 80. The desert whipped past in a blur, and I realized this was crazy. If I crashed, I'd be stuck alone in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down. The headlights behind me caught up, then pinned themselves right behind me again, almost as if taunting, "You can't get away." By now, fear had fully set in. I had to do something. Should I call the police? My phone's battery was too low for a call that might drop, and how would I even describe this? "Officer, there's a scary SUV following me." Without an actual crime, I didn't think they'd rush out to help. After another 10 minutes of cat and mouse, I spotted a rest area. It wasn't exactly a big official rest stop, more like a wide patch of shoulder with a single streetlight and a picnic table. I decided I'd pull over. Maybe the driver would pass by, and my suspicions would prove wrong. Adrenaline made my head buzz as I flicked on my blinker, glided to a halt under that lone streetlight, and forced myself to breathe. The SUV slowed but kept going for a few seconds, and I almost laughed in relief. Then it stopped about 100 yards ahead. The driver's door opened. Someone got out. Even in the dim light, I could make out a silhouette, a tall figure in a dark jacket. He, or she, but it looked like a man, stood there for a moment, facing me. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. Then the figure climbed back in, slammed the door, and the SUV tore off into the night. I took a moment to compose myself, half expecting him to circle back. Nothing happened. Silence. Maybe that was the end of it, I thought. Maybe it was all in my head. I pulled back onto the road. For a while, I felt silly for overreacting. Route 19 was deserted, and my headlights revealed only open desert to the sides, an occasional billboard advertising roadside attractions miles away. I checked the clock again. 10:30 p.m. I had about 4 more hours to go. That was when I saw it up ahead. Taillights weaving erratically, as though the driver was drunk or furious. My stomach twisted into a knot. It was the SUV, unmistakably. It must have taken a different route or pulled a quick U-turn, and now it was in front of me. Before I could even think, those taillights flared bright as the SUV slammed on its brakes, skidding sideways across both lanes. I braked hard, nearly fishtailing, and came to a stop just a few yards behind it. My pulse hammered. The SUV jerked forward, fishtailed again, then shot off. I didn't want to follow it, but there was only one road. I kept a good distance, about half a mile, barely able to see the faint glow of its lights. Whenever the road curved, they'd disappear, only to reappear moments later. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The desert night pressed in, every shadow seeming alive, every flicker of light on the horizon raising my hopes for another car. Any car. But the highway was empty except for us. Suddenly, those lights vanished. I thought maybe the SUV had taken another exit, but my relief was short-lived. Within a minute, it was behind me again, barreling up, headlights glaring in my rear view. This time there was no caution. It roared forward, tailgating me so close I thought the bumper might scrape. My entire body tensed. The next 5 minutes were the most harrowing of my life. Every time I sped up, the SUV sped up. When I slowed, it slowed. The driver would veer to one side, then the other, threatening to overtake me but never doing it. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, and I was definitely the mouse. Then came the hit. At first I thought I imagined it, a subtle jolt from behind, but the second impact was harder. Metal on metal, the sickening crunch making my stomach lurch. My sedan lurched forward, skidding on the asphalt. I fought the wheel, trying to keep control. I glimpsed the SUV's shape in my mirror, a hulking shadow with no plate I could see, before it rammed me a third time. The world spun. Gravel flew as I veered off the shoulder. My car plunged into a shallow ditch, the front end smashing against a rock. The airbag exploded in my face, the seatbelt digging into my chest so hard I thought it might snap my ribs. For a heartbeat, everything went silent except the hissing of my radiator. My head throbbed, ears ringing. I tasted blood. My lip must have split on impact. Slowly, I realized the SUV had stopped on the road behind me. Its headlights illuminated the interior of my wrecked car, revealing the dust swirling in the air. I fumbled for the door handle, but it was jammed from the crash. My heart was in my throat as I saw a figure step out, backlit by those glaring headlights. He moved with a sense of purpose, like he'd done this before. My hands trembled as I tried to climb over the center console to get out the passenger side. Then I heard a metallic clang. He was dragging something along the ground, a tire iron or crowbar. My window was cracked from the collision, spider-webbed glass that seemed ready to give. I shoved the passenger door open with my shoulder. It creaked, resisting, but finally let go. I fell out into the dirt, the desert air shocking my lungs. My entire body ached. I crawled around the hood, blinking against the bright beams of the SUV. The figure was at the driver's side now, peering into the broken window. I could hear his heavy breathing. He slammed the tire iron against the door, sending bits of glass showering inward. I had no plan other than to run, but we were in the middle of nowhere. The highway was deserted. My phone was dead or close to it. I stumbled to my feet, eyes searching for any sign of help. Nothing but darkness and the weak moonlight. A blinding flash suddenly lit the highway, the headlights from a large truck barreling down the road. It sounded like an 18-wheeler straining under a full load. The man stopped, turning his head toward the noise. I seized the moment and scrambled away from my car, waving my arms frantically. The truck's horn blared, an ear-splitting scream that jolted every nerve in my body. Tires screeched as the truck swerved, avoiding the SUV in my wreck. I thought I was about to be flattened, but the truck came to a shuddering stop a few yards away. The driver, a burly guy in a flannel shirt, jumped down and shouted something I didn't catch. The man with the tire iron hesitated, scanning the situation like a cornered predator. Then he bolted back to his SUV. He gunned the engine, swung around the truck, and roared off into the night, red taillights disappearing as quickly as they'd come. The truck driver ran over and helped me to the roadside, calling 911 on his cell. I was trembling all over, unable to form complete sentences. The adrenaline crashed hard, making me want to both scream and pass out. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before the sheriff's deputy rolled up. I tried to explain what happened between gasping breaths. He took my statement, shining his flashlight on the wreck of my car, on the gouges in the dirt where I'd left the pavement. Another deputy arrived, and they drove up and down the highway looking for any sign of the SUV. But there was nothing. No tracks, no fresh skid marks, aside from the ones right around my crash site. Eventually, they towed my sedan, and the truck driver, his name was Joe, if I recall correctly, waited with me the whole time, offering me a spare jacket when I started shivering. By then, the adrenaline had bled out, leaving me cold, shaking, and terrified. The cops told me they'd file a report, keep an eye out for any suspicious SUVs. I nodded, not really believing they'd find this guy. Whoever he was, he'd vanished into the desert night, leaving nothing but broken glass and my wrecked nerves behind. I still see that shape in my mirror sometimes, especially driving alone after dark. I glance back and imagine those headlights, the relentless way they followed me, forced me off the road like I was prey. People ask why I no longer enjoy solo road trips, why I'd rather buy a plane ticket than spend a night on the highway. I tell them I just prefer the convenience of air travel, but the truth is a lot darker. Some nights, when I shut off the lamp and close my eyes, I feel that jolt again. Metal hitting metal, the wheel jerking in my hands. I hear the crunch of gravel underfoot as someone comes toward me with that cold, sharp intent. And I realize how fragile it all is, how fast a quiet drive through the desert can turn into a nightmare from which you might never wake up. I'll admit, when I heard about what happened to Alex Carter out in Arizona, I took it with a grain of salt. Don't get me wrong, being a traveling salesman has taught me that terrible things do happen on lonely highways. You see folks stranded all the time, abandoned cars, baking under the sun, even the occasional freak accident. But the way Alex told his story about that mysterious SUV and the vicious crash made my skin crawl. Still, I told myself I was different. I was older, savvier. I'd been on the road for over 20 years. I knew how to handle trouble. Turns out trouble isn't particularly impressed by experience, nor does it show up when it's convenient. That's exactly how I found myself alone and weaponless on a desolate stretch of I-70 in Kansas. And believe me, if I'd known how the night would unfold, I would have taken a flight or at least cut through another route. But this is how it happened. Let me back up just a bit. I'd been in Denver for a weekend conference, trying to sell a new line of dental equipment. Monday morning rolled around, and I planned to drive to a small town in eastern Kansas to meet a client who managed a chain of local dentist offices. Nothing big, but enough potential commission to justify the 6-hour drive. The morning started off just fine. Blue skies, that crisp, clean mountain air, still lingering in the car as I began my descent onto the Great Plains. I made good time passing the state line. By the afternoon, the weather changed, as it tends to do out here. Clouds rolled in, turning the sky a dull gray, and the wind kicked up dust that scoured everything in sight. I remember scanning the horizon and seeing nothing but flat farmland broken up by the occasional grain silo. A few hours later, I hit a small diner for a late lunch, some burger and fries that, I'll confess, tasted better than any fast food chain I've had. I topped off my gas tank, checked my phone, a few texts from my wife about picking up groceries on my way home. Sure thing, I texted back, not knowing that by nightfall I'd be in no position to do any shopping. Anyway, I got back on I-70, heading east. My plan was to reach the client's town by dusk, check into a modest roadside motel, maybe watch some TV, and call it a day. The miles disappeared beneath my tires, and soon the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting the sky in an orange glow that quickly faded into deep purple. Traffic thinned out. Semis still lumbered by now and then, but personal vehicles grew scarce. By 8 o'clock, I was practically alone on the road. Then I saw him. It started with a small shape on the shoulder about a quarter-mile ahead. As my headlights illuminated the figure, I realized it was a man, waving his arms frantically. Parked beside him was an old sedan, hood propped up. The flicker of the car's hazard lights signaled distress. Normally, I'm cautious any traveling salesman learns you can't just pull over for every hitchhiker or broken-down vehicle, but I also felt that pang of empathy. It's one thing to be stranded on a busy highway during daylight. It's another to be stuck at night, in the middle of a nearly empty interstate. Plus, I could almost hear my wife's voice in my head. What if it was you stranded out there? So I slowed down, pressed my hazard button, and rolled onto the shoulder about 20 yards ahead of him. When I glanced at my phone, there was only 1 bar of reception. Better than nothing, but not by much. I left the engine running, I'm paranoid like that, and popped my head out the window. "You okay?" I called, my voice echoing a bit in the flat emptiness. He jogged over, a tall guy in a jean jacket, maybe mid-30s, hair messy like he'd been sweating or sleeping rough. I cracked the window halfway, not wanting to unlock the door. "Man, thanks so much," he said, breathless. "My engine died, and my phone's out of battery. I've been stuck here for like an hour. Could you give me a ride to the next gas station? Or maybe help me call a tow truck?" His words spilled out in a rush, like he was trying to get everything in before I had a chance to say no. I glanced behind him, at his car. The interior light was on, but I couldn't see anyone else inside. The hazard lights blinked weakly, like the battery might be about to die completely. "Where's the nearest station?" I asked, my caution rising. He pointed vaguely down the road. "I think it's about 15 miles further. There's a sign. You must have seen it." I shook my head. Haven't passed one in a while. He laughed awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe I'm misremembering. Look, I'd be super grateful if you could just give me a lift." "My phone is totally dead, see?" He held up a dark screen, as if to prove it. A little warning bell went off in my head. People lie, that's just a fact. But then again, maybe he was telling the truth. A dead phone on the highway is not exactly a rare tragedy. I reached over to the passenger seat and grabbed my own phone. 1 bar. Not the best, but possibly enough to call 911, or a roadside service. "I can try calling a tow for you," I offered. He nodded, but I noticed his eyes flicked toward the inside of my car. "That'd be awesome, thanks." I pulled up my contacts, searching for a roadside assistance number. Meanwhile, he hovered near my passenger window, glancing around like he was checking the back seat. The phone rang once, twice, and then cut off. Bad reception. Damn, I muttered. Signal spotty. He shifted on his feet, glancing at his sedan. Can I at least borrow your charger? I've got one in my car, but it's not working. That sounded flimsy, but I tried not to judge. I don't think it'll help. I don't have the right cable. His hand twitched at his side, and for a second, something in his posture changed. Like he'd gone from desperate to annoyed, or maybe I was imagining it. The next moment, his face lit up with a pleading smile. I hate to ask again, but is there any chance you could just give me a quick ride? I'll make it worth your while. I've got cash if you want gas money. I felt uneasy, but I also didn't want to leave the guy stranded. Even if he was lying about some details, it was still pitch black out, and the nearest building was probably miles away. My rational mind said, no, call the cops, let them handle it. But that single bar of reception was barely strong enough for a call, and I might end up stuck too. Look, I said, I can't take you too far out of my way, but if you want to ride to the next exit, that's about it. He broke into a relieved grin. That's all I need, man, thanks. He reached for the passenger door handle. Without thinking, I hit the door lock switch. The look he shot me was a mix of confusion and something darker. I forced a laugh, playing it off. Sorry, habit, let me unlock it. As he climbed in, the hair on the back of my neck prickled. He slid his beat-up duffel bag onto his lap, which struck me as odd because most people would toss it on the floor or the back seat. But I said nothing, just pulled onto the highway. The wind battered the side of my car, and I noticed the temperature gauge dropping slightly. Kansas nights can get cold when the sun's gone. The first few minutes were awkward. He kept shifting like he couldn't get comfortable. I tried to make small talk. So, where you headed? He shrugged. Oh, just around. Job interviews, you know how it is. His answers were vague, and I decided maybe it was better not to push. We passed a mile marker. Still no sign of a gas station. My phone's screen glowed with that single bar, which blinked out and then back again. After a few minutes of silence, he leaned forward, staring at the road ahead. I think there's a shortcut up here, he said. Take that next country road on the right. It's quicker. Shortcut to where? There's barely anything out here. It'll lead us to a bigger station. I remember now it's off the main interstate, but it's the only one that's open all night. Something in me twisted. I'd rather stick to I-70, I said, trying to sound casual. We'll see a sign eventually. He let out a short laugh that didn't sound amused. Look, I've been traveling this route for a while, and trust me, there's a station out there. Could save us time. My grip on the wheel tightened. I'm good. I'll wait for the official exit. Shouldn't be more than 10 miles. The tension in the car ratcheted up. He shifted in his seat again, and I saw his hand slide to the duffel bag. My pulse spiked. I realized I didn't actually know this man's name. I'd been so distracted by the situation that I hadn't asked. He stared at me with dark eyes that didn't blink enough, as if measuring me. "Stop the car," he said suddenly. My stomach dropped. What? He reached into his bag and pulled out a small knife. Not a huge hunting blade or anything, but enough to make my throat go dry. The overhead light was dim, but the reflection off the blade was unmistakable. "Pull over," he repeated, his voice low. Instinctively, I eased off the gas. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. "Look, man," I said, trying to sound calm. "We can talk this out." "Pull over," he snapped. "I'm not going to kill you. I just want the car." Despite the panic threatening to overwhelm me, I managed to flick on my hazard lights and steer onto the shoulder. The night outside seemed even darker, the wind keening across the flatlands. He made a gesture with the knife for me to stop completely. I did. "Give me your phone," he demanded, the knife still aimed at me. "Your wallet, too." My hands were shaking. Fine. I handed over my phone, then reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet. I was breathing in short gasps, like a cornered animal. He snatched them and tossed both into the duffel. "Now get out," he said. I stared at him. If I stepped out, would he drive off? Or would he do something worse? My mind raced back to the stories you read online where things go very badly for people who get carjacked at night. But I couldn't see an alternative. I popped the driver's door open slowly, trying to keep my movements clear and non-threatening. "Vester," he growled. I slid out, my dress shoes crunching on the gravel. The cold wind smacked my face, bringing tears to my eyes. He crawled over the center console into the driver's seat. For a moment, the interior light illuminated his face, pale, unshaven, eyes darting. He seemed jittery, maybe on drugs. Part of me wanted to grab him, but that knife had looked sharp, and one wrong move would get me stabbed. He slammed the door shut, revved the engine. I stumbled back, my arms raised in a half-hearted attempt to keep distance. The tires spat gravel, and the car sped off, taillights shrinking into the Kansas night until they vanished. There I was, stranded on I-70 with nothing but the clothes on my back, my wallet, phone, gone. The wind carried the faint sound of the stolen engine as it disappeared over a rise. Darkness cloaked everything, except the dim glow of stars and the thin beam of a distant radio tower. I stood there, heart pounding, cursing my own stupidity. I had no choice but to walk. For a while, I trudged along the shoulder, casting nervous glances behind me. Every gust of wind, every rustle of scrub grass made me flinch. With no phone to call for help and the nearest town miles away, I felt a dread that was almost suffocating. The hours blurred. My feet ached. I could barely see a few steps ahead of me. I tried to keep to the gravel, so if a car did pass, they'd have a chance of spotting me before running me over. I don't know how long it was. Maybe 2 hours? When I finally saw headlights cresting a hill, I waved my arms, praying they'd stop. It was a beat-up pickup truck with a middle-aged couple inside. They rolled down the window just enough to hear me. I probably looked half-crazed, but I managed to explain what had happened. They let me climb into their back seat, cautiously of course, and drove me to a nearby gas station where I called the police. When the cops arrived, I gave them every detail. How I found the man, how he threatened me, the direction he sped off. An officer took notes, stifling a yawn. I could tell they'd heard variations of this story before. They said they'd do a search, but if the guy ditched the car or had a stolen plate, chances were slim. By dawn, I was in a cramped police station, answering more questions. No, I didn't know the man's name. Yes, I saw the knife. Yes, he took my phone, wallet, and the car. Eventually, they cut me loose. I ended up calling my wife, collect from a landline. Her voice cracked with worry. The cops never found my car, or if they did, they never told me. Insurance covered some of the loss, but not all. For a few weeks, I couldn't get behind the wheel without my pulse going haywire. Every time I saw someone on the side of the road, I had to fight the urge to look away and floor it. Even now, if someone waves for help in the middle of nowhere, my instincts scream, "Drive!" The weirdest part, in hindsight, is how normal the guy looked. No crazed expression, no ominous vibe, just a casual stranger in a jean jacket. And maybe that's the scariest thing. Evil doesn't always come snarling or dripping with menace. Sometimes it has a friendly smile, a plausible story, and a quiet desperation you almost sympathize with, right until it sticks a knife in your face. I can still hear Alex Carter's voice in my head, describing that black SUV relentlessly chasing him across the Arizona desert. How close he came to not making it out alive. At least he had the fortune of a passing truck driver. Me, I had to walk the highway until I nearly collapsed from exhaustion, but in the end, I guess we're both lucky. We survived. That's more than some can say. If you're traveling these long stretches of highway, Arizona, Kansas, or anywhere else, take it from me. Keep your doors locked, your phone charged, and your guard up, because out there, in the wide open spaces where help might be hours away, you never know who you'll run into. And sometimes, a simple gesture of kindness can go horribly wrong, turning your routine drive into a nightmare you'll be thankful to escape with your life. I heard about what happened to Jordan Ellis on one of those late-night local news segments that like to fill their airtime with grim stories from America's highways. It didn't surprise me. My father used to joke that road trips always bring out the weirdos, and given my own experiences, I've started to believe him. By then, I'd already known about Alex Carter's harrowing encounter in Arizona. In fact, thinking of both Alex and Jordan reminded me of why I usually prefer not to drive long distances after sundown. But this time I was on a tight schedule, so I broke my own rule. I was traveling from Portland down to Reno, carrying a trunk load of photography equipment for a project I'd been assigned on short notice. See, I'm a freelance photographer. It's a job that sometimes has me sleeping in motels, other times in my car, and occasionally, if I'm lucky, in a nice resort. I can handle being alone, it's practically in the job description. Still, after hearing those horrifying tales, one about a relentless SUV on a desert highway and one about a knife-wielding hitchhiker, some part of me was on high alert. I didn't want to wind up as the next tragic news story. Yet there I was, continuing my drive past midnight. I remember the sky that night, black and wide with not a single star visible thanks to the thick clouds that loomed over the Oregon forests. The road was mostly empty, occasionally winding through towering trees that shrouded the moonlight. My plan was to make it a few more hours, then stop somewhere with basic amenities, maybe a well-lit rest stop or a roadside motel, but sometimes your body has its own plans, and mine was screaming for sleep. Around 12:30, I spotted a sign for a picnic area and pullover spot about a mile ahead. It wasn't an official rest stop with vending machines and clean bathrooms, but I'd used places like this before. Usually there'd be a couple of cars or RVs parked there, people catching a few hours' sleep. When I pulled in, though, it was deserted. The only illumination was a single street light flickering at the entrance, leaving the edges of the lot swallowed by shadows. I hesitated, thinking of Jordan's story about picking up that stranger in Kansas and how it all went so wrong. My instincts nagged me to keep driving, but I was bone-tired with drooping eyelids and a stiff back, so I parked beneath that buzzing light, hoping its glow would at least deter anyone with bad intentions. Let me tell you about that parking lot. It had cracked pavement with weeds poking through, surrounded by dense pines. A couple of rusty trash cans overflowed with scraps. A beat-up wooden sign posted some outdated rules about littering and forest fire safety. No other cars, no hum of passing traffic, just silence. I locked my doors, cracked the windows for some air, and reclined my seat. My plan: nap for an hour or two, then wake up and power through the final stretch to Reno. That's standard procedure for me, and usually it works out fine. But this time, something felt off. Maybe it was the stillness of the forest, or the flicker of the streetlight overhead. I told myself I was just spooked by the news stories. With a deep breath, I closed my eyes. I must have dozed off, because I woke some time later to a faint sound. At first, I couldn't place it. I thought it might be the wind rustling through the evergreens, but then I heard it again. Crunch, crunch, like gravel shifting under slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart thumped so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. I sat up, forcing myself to breathe. The driver's side window was open a crack, letting in cool night air. I listened for a moment, straining my ears. Nothing. I was about to chalk it up to an overactive imagination when the noise started again, closer this time. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Pause. Flicking on the dome light felt like a bad idea. I didn't want to advertise my presence any more than I already had, so I stayed still, my hand hovering over the key in the ignition. The streetlight outside buzzed, casting a sickly yellow halo on the hood of my car, but leaving the sides bathed in murky darkness. If someone was out there, they were walking along the shadowed perimeter, just beyond my field of vision. I debated turning the engine on and getting the hell out, but then I thought, what if it's just a deer or some lost camper? I decided to wait it out a few more seconds. My heart hammered in my chest, and a thin layer of sweat broke out on my forehead. That's when I heard the scrape of metal against metal, a soft grating sound that made my nerves jump. It came from near the back door on the driver's side. I didn't dare lean over to look. Every cell in my body was screaming, "Leave now!" But I couldn't bring myself to start the car. Some irrational fear told me if I made too much noise, whoever was out there would react. The scraping sound intensified, punctuated by small taps. Was someone testing the handle with a tool, trying to break in? My breath felt stuck in my throat. I'd read about criminals using screwdrivers or crowbars to jimmy a lock. All I had was my cell phone, and it had maybe half a battery left. I grabbed it, flipped it on. No signal. Of course, this part of Oregon was notorious for spotty coverage. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. Another sound reached my ears, soft breathing, or maybe the wind. But it was close, as if someone was crouched by my door. My pulse pounded so hard I felt dizzy. Then I saw movement in the rearview mirror, a flicker of a shape passing in and out of the streetlight's feeble glow. A moment later, the shadow appeared by the passenger side. It was the outline of a person, hunched low. I couldn't see details, just the silhouette, but I knew they were looking into the car. Horror seized me. If they realized I was awake, would they smash the window? Attack me? The handle on the passenger door jiggled, and I nearly lost it. I heard a faint click as they tried to open it. Locked, thank God. They paused, then reached for something in the darkness. I couldn't see what. In my mind, I kept hearing Jordan's story about the knife-wielding stranger, but this wasn't even the same scenario. Jordan at least spoke to the guy. Here, there was no conversation, no attempt at deception, just cold, methodical prowling. Gripping my keys, I slowly inched them toward the ignition. The overhead light was off, so at least I wouldn't give myself away too soon. My hand trembled so badly I was afraid I'd drop the keys. The passenger door handle jiggled again, more forceful this time, and I heard a faint grunt. This intruder was determined. I told myself, start the car, slam it in reverse, and peel out. But then I realized my front wheels were turned toward the lot's edge. If I reversed in a panic, I might end up in a ditch, or, worse, pinned against a cluster of dumpsters. The rest area was laid out in such a way that I needed a few seconds to maneuver. I counted to 3 in my head. 1, 2. Suddenly, the person shifted, creeping around to the front of the car, a black figure crossing my windshield. My heart hammered, but I took the chance. Hand on the key, I turned it. The engine coughed to life with a roar that sounded deafening in the stillness. My headlights blazed forward, illuminating the figure for the briefest moment. I saw a man, maybe early 30s, with a pale face and wild eyes. He wore a dark beanie that covered most of his hair. In one hand he gripped something metallic, some kind of thin crowbar or pry tool. The moment the lights hit him, he twisted away, raising an arm to shield his face. That was enough for me. I slammed the gear shift into reverse, stomping on the gas. Gravel spat up behind me as I lurched backward. In the glare, I caught a glimpse of him darting to the side, like a cornered animal, his posture tense. For a split second, I thought he might run at me, try to smash the window. But instead, he skittered off into the dark, beyond the reach of the streetlight. My heart drummed so fiercely I could feel it in my throat. I whipped the wheel around, shifted into drive, and sped toward the exit of the lot. The car bounced over a small pothole, jarring my teeth. As I pulled back onto the highway, I caught one last look in my rearview mirror. The silhouette stood at the edge of the lot, watching me with that metal tool in hand, headlights flashing across his figure like a strobe. He didn't chase me onto the road, he simply stared. I drove like a madwoman for the next 20 minutes. My hands were so tight on the wheel, my knuckles looked bleached white. Every nerve was on fire. I expected him to appear in my mirror, tailing me, but no other cars showed up. The forest swallowed everything behind me, leaving only the winding asphalt ahead. Eventually, I saw a sign for a larger rest stop, one with restrooms, vending machines, and bright lights. I almost considered stopping to report the incident, or at least calm down, but a new fear tugged at me. What if he followed me there? No, I told myself, I had to get to the next actual town. People, a police station, if possible. When I finally spotted a cluster of neon signs and lit storefronts at the highway exit, relief coursed through me like warm water. I pulled into a well-lit gas station, locked my doors, and just sat there catching my breath. I realized my entire body was shaking, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. I'd never felt so vulnerable in all my life. A middle-aged attendant leaned out the station's door, probably curious why I was idling in the lot. I gestured a quick wave, then fumbled for my phone. Now, 2 bars of reception. I called the police. By the time I finished explaining, my teeth were chattering so hard it sounded like static on the line. The dispatcher said they'd send a patrol car to check the area, but I doubted they'd find anything. That man could vanish into those woods in seconds. After I hung up, I texted a friend in Reno, telling her I might be delayed. I couldn't bring myself to drive through the rest of the night. The adrenaline crash left me feeling sick and exhausted. I found a cheap motel next door, flashing neon vacancy sign, one of those places where the paint peels off the doors. It felt like the Ritz compared to my terrifying brush with that prowler. I hardly slept, though. Every time the building creaked, I jolted awake, imagining footsteps outside my window or a crowbar scraping against the lock. I kept thinking of those stories, Alex forced off the road, Jordan losing his car, and now my own experience, an almost silent intruder, no demands, no words, just methodical terror in the dead of night. The next morning, I forced myself back onto the highway. Daylight made it easier, but I was still jittery. Every rest stop sign triggered a wave of nausea. I couldn't stop replaying the moment the headlights lit up that man's pale face. The emptiness in his eyes was something I've never forgotten. It was like he was beyond fear, beyond hesitation, like harming another person was just a task. In the days following, local law enforcement left me a voicemail, saying they'd combed through the area but found no leads, no footprints, no abandoned car, no sign of anyone lurking around. I wasn't surprised. People like that vanish into the cracks of society, waiting for the next vulnerable traveler to come along. And that, I suppose, is the moral of my story. It doesn't matter how many times you've done these drives or how cautious you think you are. The moment you let your guard down, you can become a statistic in someone else's late-night horror broadcast. If I'd pressed on a little farther, maybe I would have found a busier place to park, or even a motel. But exhaustion dulls judgment, and I was sure I'd be fine, right up until I wasn't. I still travel alone sometimes, my job demands it, but I've become relentless about planning. No more sleeping in deserted pull-offs. If I can't find a well-lit, populated rest stop, I keep going. Every little noise sets my nerves on edge. Every unknown shape in the corner of my mirror makes me jump. I hate that I've lost that sense of carefree exploration, but there's no going back. So when folks tell me about the horrors they've seen on dark roads, like Alex's near-fatal chase and Jordan's carjacking, I don't doubt them for a second. In fact, I know firsthand that there are worse things out there than a short temper or an empty fuel gauge. There are people who roam the roads at night, waiting to prey on anyone too tired, too trusting, or too alone to fight back. I count myself lucky. Some don't get away, and that reality is enough to keep me awake for hours behind the wheel, searching for the next safe haven in a world that sometimes feels like it's out to get you. They were still talking about Nicole Harper's close call on some late-night radio show as I made my way down that long, lonely highway in Mississippi. Seems word travels fast when it comes to horror on America's roads. Stories like Nicole's, and before that Jordan Ellis's ordeal in Kansas, had turned into cautionary tales whispered among truckers, insomniacs, and folks who spend most of their waking hours on back roads. The night host had a raspy drawl, painting Nicole's terrifying encounter with a shadowy prowler in Oregon as yet another reason to never sleep in your car. I remember thinking it was a shameful coincidence, because I've been known to pull over and grab a nap myself when the drive gets too long. But that was before I found out how quickly a harmless rest stop can turn into a nightmare. That evening, I was driving my old Chevy pickup through rural Mississippi. The back roads here wind through an endless patchwork of fields and marshes, with only the moon and your headlights to keep you company. I'm Kevin Ruiz, 39, a mechanic by trade. I'd taken a job down south, traveling between small towns to service farming equipment. Late hours never used to faze me, but lately, I'd been hearing too many tales like Nicole's, tales that reminded me just how vulnerable you can be on an empty stretch of road. The night air was thick with humidity. Every so often, my headlights would catch a haze of insects dancing over the asphalt. It was after 1 a.m. when I spotted blinking hazards up ahead. The strobing orange lights pierced the darkness, drawing my focus like a moth to flame. Usually, my instinct is to help. I've jumped more dead batteries than I can count, changed a fair share of flat tires, but Jordan Ellis's fiasco in Kansas kept echoing in my mind. A con man with a knife who'd stolen the man's car, leaving him to hike miles in the dark. My headlights illuminated the scene, a battered sedan parked crookedly on the shoulder. Its hood ajar. Lying on the ground next to the open driver's door was a figure, unmoving, arms splayed out. My stomach did a flip. If that wasn't a real emergency, it was one hell of a setup. I slowed down, more out of instinct than intent, letting the beams sweep across the body. I couldn't see a face, just a glimpse of pale arms and greasy hair. No movement. Could be a medical crisis, maybe a heart attack. Or it could be something worse. A memory of Nicole's story flashed through my mind, how the intruder had silently crept around her car, a predator waiting for the moment she let her guard down. The voice in my head told me to keep driving, call the cops once I got a signal. But I couldn't shake the small voice of conscience. What if he really needs help? I live by a code, help if you can, but stay smart. So I tugged my truck onto the shoulder, leaving about 50 feet between me and the sedan. My high beams stayed on, bathing the scene in harsh light. The figure didn't move. I cracked my window an inch, hoping for a single bar of reception on my phone. No luck. Typical Mississippi backroads. No cell towers for miles. Heart pounding, I took a deep breath and reached under the seat to feel for the tire iron I keep there. Then I pulled the handle, stepping out onto the gravel. "Hey!" I shouted, voice echoing in the night. "You need help?" No response. The figure remained lifeless. The wind rustled through nearby pines, adding a low hiss to the quiet. My boots crunched on loose stones as I edged closer. I kept the tire iron in my right hand, hidden behind my thigh. Each step made my stomach knot tighter. When I was about 20 feet away, I noticed the man's clothes. Faded jeans, a t-shirt stained with grease. His shoes were worn-out sneakers caked in dust. The overhead dome light from the sedan revealed a big stain on the driver's seat, though I couldn't tell if it was oil, water, or something else.
"Sir?"
I tried again, taking another careful step.
"You all right?"
Suddenly, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. A flicker in the darkness beyond the car's trunk, like a shifting shadow. My instincts screamed at me. This wasn't a normal breakdown. I froze, scanning the gloom. The high beams from my truck created sharp contrasts of light and shadow, making it hard to see what lurked beyond. For a split second, I thought I saw a silhouette slip behind the sedan, crouched low. My breath caught. This was bad. My mind raced. Back away slowly, get in the truck, drive. I took one step backward, then another. That's when the unconscious man on the ground twitched. He sprang to his feet with an alarming speed, as if jolted by electricity. There was no dizziness in his posture, no staggering. This had all been an act. I lurched into action, pivoting to run for my truck. The same moment, a second figure emerged from the far side of the sedan, racing toward me at full sprint. The overhead dome light and my truck's beams lit him enough for me to see the expression on his face. Predatory. A grin stretched too wide. My heart pounded as I realized they were flanking me, one on either side. The first man lunged forward, arms outstretched like he aimed to tackle me, but I still had a decent head start and, more importantly, a direct path to my vehicle. With a burst of adrenaline, I bolted. My boots slapped the pavement. A wild glance back showed both of them giving chase, their footsteps echoing over the lonely road. My truck was maybe 40 feet away. It felt like a mile. I shouted something, maybe a curse, maybe just a strangled yell. All I could think was, I have to reach the door. And I did, fumbling with the handle, practically throwing myself onto the driver's seat. One of them slammed against the side of the truck before I could shut the door, his hands scrabbling at my arm. He wore a ratty jacket, eyes wide with an unsettling gleam. The other one circled around, yanking at the passenger door. I'd locked it earlier, a habit I'd picked up after hearing too many horror stories. With a desperate kick, I shoved the first man away. I twisted the key, already in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. Through the windshield, I saw the second guy pounding on the passenger window, his mouth stretched in a silent snarl. The glass splintered in a hairline crack where he struck it with something metal. A baton or a pipe, I couldn't tell. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. I slammed the gear shift into reverse. The truck lurched backward, throwing the man at my door off balance. He stumbled, hands smacking against the side panel. The rear tires squealed as I gunned it, praying I wouldn't swerve off the shoulder into the ditch. A jolt reverberated through the chassis. The first man had leapt onto the bed of the truck. My heart thumped so loud I could hardly hear anything else. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed him crawling closer to the cab, face contorted in determination. I whipped the wheel hard, the truck fishtailing. Gravel flew in a shower of sparks, and for a heartbeat I thought I might tip over. Instead, the abrupt swerve threw the hitchhiker off balance. He tumbled onto the road with a sickening thud. I snapped the wheel forward, slamming it into drive. My front bumper grazed the battered sedan, scraping metal with a squeal that sent sparks popping across my vision. The man at the passenger door scrambled aside to avoid getting pinned. I stomped the gas. The truck burst free, fishtailing for a second before tearing down the highway. My headlights glared against the blacktop, revealing nothing but darkness ahead. In the mirror, I caught a glimpse of both men. One stood hunched, the other was on his feet, brushing himself off. Their shapes shrank as I sped away, swallowing up the distance with every frantic push on the accelerator. My lungs burned as if I'd run a marathon. My hands shook on the wheel, adrenaline still surging. There were no other vehicles in sight. I flew down that road, petrified they might have a second car or come after me somehow. The minutes stretched like hours. Finally, when I dared to slow down, my chest was tight and my throat parched. "Pull yourself together," I muttered, checking my phone again. No signal. That meant no calling the cops. Yet. I was too terrified to stop anywhere, so I drove for another half hour, scanning for signs of civilization, or at least a phone booth, though those are almost extinct nowadays. At last I saw lights glowing from a small service station near the intersection of the highway and a county road. The place looked dated but welcoming enough. A single pump island, a convenience store with flickering fluorescents. I pulled in cautiously, scanning the lot. No suspicious cars, no lurking figures. I parked under the brightest floodlight I could find. Only then did I notice the shallow scratches on the passenger's side door where the second man had hammered with his weapon. The glass had a star-shaped crack, but it hadn't fully shattered. My entire body felt numb, as though the fear had taken my nerves hostage. The clerk inside jumped when I entered, probably because I nearly rammed the door open. I stumbled to the counter, breath coming in gasps. The clerk was a wiry man in his late 50s, wearing a ball cap. Alarm spread across his face as he realized how rattled I was. "Sir, you all right?" he asked. "No, need police," I managed between gasps. He pointed to a landline phone on the back wall. I snatched it, dialing 911. The dispatcher's calm tone was a stark contrast to my jittery nerves. I told her everything, the broken-down sedan, the men who faked being unconscious, how one nearly smashed my window while the other hopped in my truck bed. She asked for a location, and I gave her the cross streets posted outside, praying they'd dispatch someone soon. When I hung up, I slumped against the wall, exhaustion crashing over me like a wave. My thoughts flicked to Nicole Harper's story of that silent prowler outside her car in Oregon, and how she'd said everything changed the moment he'd tried the door handle. If she hadn't acted, she might have ended up in serious trouble. I felt the same. If I'd been any slower to react, I'd be in their hands right now. Or worse. The clerk handed me a cup of water. "You mind waiting here till the cops arrive?" "Not at all," I said, voice trembling. "I'm not going back out there alone." He nodded solemnly, stepping out from behind the counter to stand beside me. We both peered through the store's glass front, watching the silent night beyond the fluorescent glow. Every minute felt like an hour, but eventually, a single squad car pulled in. Lights off, a deputy stepping out with a flashlight. I told him everything. He asked me to show him the damage on my truck. I pointed out the scratched paint, the cracked window, the fresh dents on the passenger side and the bed rails. The deputy radioed in, then took my statement in detail. He promised to look for the men and the sedan, but deep down I suspected it was long gone, or they were parked somewhere else, waiting for their next victim. After the deputy left, I stayed at the station a while longer, sipping coffee the clerk offered. My hands still shook so bad I nearly spilled it all over the floor. It wasn't just fear coursing through me, it was anger too. Anger at those two for turning a basic gesture of roadside concern into a trap. Anger that honest folks can't stop to help without risking their lives. By the time I finally mustered the courage to drive again, dawn was breaking over the Mississippi horizon, painting the clouds a pale pink. The clerk gave me his number, said to call if I needed anything else. I thanked him, though we both knew there wasn't much more he could do. I wish I could say the cops found them, caught the would-be attackers red-handed, but as far as I know, they never turned up. Whenever I'm back in that part of Mississippi, I grip the wheel a little tighter, my eyes flicking to every idle car with hazard lights, waiting for the next ambush. It's not a good feeling, living with that kind of dread. But these roads don't promise safety. They never did. People think the scariest part of a long drive is falling asleep at the wheel. I've learned otherwise. Sometimes it's the nightmares that greet you when you're wide awake, expecting to save a stranger, and realizing, in that heartbeat where everything slows down, that the stranger's only plan is to trap you like prey. Every now and then, I think about Nicole Harper, about Jordan Ellis, even Alex Carter out in Arizona. I wonder how many more stories like ours are out there, unreported or drowned out by the next bit of sensational news. The roads keep their secrets well, especially the back roads in the darkest parts of America. But if you take one lesson from me, let it be this: never trust a scene that's too perfect. Sometimes that body on the ground isn't unconscious at all. It's just waiting for you to get close enough to sink its claws in. Word of Kevin Ruiz's near-fatal encounter in Mississippi spread quickly among the late-night driving community. Those folks who spend hour upon hour on lonely back roads. It seemed that every gas station clerk and tired trucker had a version of his story. Two men feigning a breakdown, one lying in the road like a corpse until some good Samaritan stopped to help. I remember hearing about it on a crackling AM radio station while I was passing through the outskirts of Ely, Nevada. As a 50-year-old retired nurse, I've learned to take cautionary tales seriously. But even the most unsettling warnings sometimes can't compete with our own assumptions. I genuinely believed that if I kept my wits about me, nothing bad could happen. That was before I found myself at a dimly lit gas station on a deserted Nevada highway, miles from any real town, face to face with a stranger whose intentions were far darker than I could have imagined. I'd left my daughter's house in Salt Lake City earlier that morning, intending to drive straight to Bakersfield. My sister needed help after a minor surgery, and I figured I could make the trip in one go if I paced myself. The drive started uneventfully, with me sipping coffee from a thermos and humming along to oldies on the radio. Yet as evening fell, I felt the desert heat press in, even though the sun had dipped below the horizon. By 10 p.m., my eyes were burning from the dryness. I told myself I'd push on another 100 miles, but my gas gauge had other ideas, hovering just above a quarter tank. When I spotted a broken neon sign flickering "Fuel" up ahead, I decided to pull off, top up, and maybe stretch my legs. It was one of those places you see in the movies. A single pump under a yellowed canopy, a battered storefront with flickering fluorescent lights, and wide stretches of nothing in every direction. The moment I stepped out, the hot desert wind slapped me in the face, carrying the smell of dust and asphalt. My reflection in the store window reminded me of how tired I looked. Graying hair pulled into a loose ponytail, a comfortable t-shirt paired with jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. But I wasn't here for a beauty contest. I just wanted gas and maybe a bottle of cold water. Inside, the station was empty except for a young cashier who peered at me over a glossy magazine. He looked bored out of his mind. I politely asked for a restroom key and grabbed a couple of snacks. That's when I noticed him. A man lingering near the back of the store, arms folded, gaze darting between the sparse shelves of junk food and me. He wore faded jeans and a black t-shirt, hair cropped close. Not menacing at first glance, but something about the way he stood felt off. Like he was waiting for an opportunity. "Evening," I said casually, forcing a polite smile. He gave a quick nod, eyes slipping away. I felt a small prickle of unease, but said nothing. After paying for gas, I used the restroom, then came outside to fill up my car. The desert night sky sprawled overhead, pinpricked by stars so bright it felt like you could reach out and grab them. That's one thing I've always loved about the open road. Moments of awe in the midst of emptiness. But my sense of wonder vanished when I turned around and saw the man from the store standing a few feet away. He was close enough to make my heart stutter. "Sorry," I muttered, startled. "Didn't hear you come up." He offered a thin grin. "Didn't mean to spook you, ma'am. I was wondering if you might be heading west." I kept the nozzle in my car's tank, my hand tensing on the grip. "Yes, actually. Toward California." He looked relieved, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "My car broke down about an hour ago. Towed to a shop, but they can't fix it tonight. I really need to get to Beatty, my brother's place, before morning. Think you could give me a ride? I'll pay for gas." For an instant, Kevin's story from Mississippi flitted through my mind, along with Jordan's fiasco in Kansas. But this man didn't strike me as dangerous at first glance. He was polite, and his expression seemed genuinely anxious. The desert night was punishing, and I felt a pang of empathy. As a retired nurse, I've always had a soft spot for people in trouble. I hesitated. "I'm only going another hour or so before finding a motel." He shrugged, managing a polite smile. "That's perfect. Anything closer to Beatty is a big help." Against my better judgment, I agreed. "All right, but if we don't see your brother's exit in an hour or so, I'm pulling over at a motel. Deal?" He nodded, seeming eager. "Thank you, ma'am. I really appreciate it. My name's Cole." I introduced myself as Melissa, then finished fueling. The cashier inside was too engrossed in his magazine to notice us. A little voice in my head whispered that I might be making a mistake, but I told myself to stay alert. If anything felt off, I'd kick him out at the next safe place. Cole placed a small duffel bag in my back seat, then climbed into the passenger side. I couldn't help but notice how carefully he handled that bag, like it contained something fragile or important. He settled in, gazing out at the vacant highway. We set off westward, headlights cutting through the darkness. The desert night was eerily quiet. No passing cars, no signs of life, aside from the occasional desert shrub or odd shape in the distance. We made awkward small talk. He claimed he'd been in Las Vegas for a friend's bachelor party and was trying to get back home. I asked about his broken car, and he said the engine just quit, too expensive to fix on short notice. Something about his story didn't line up. He got vague on details, stumbled over the name of the buddy he stayed with in Vegas. Still, I didn't push it. 10 minutes in, the mood shifted. Cole grew quiet, staring out the window with restless energy. Every so often I caught him glancing at me, his gaze flicking toward my hands on the steering wheel. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Hey, I know a shortcut. If you take the next off-ramp, it'll save us time." A jolt of apprehension ran through me. Kevin's story returned in force. Someone urging a detour, leading him into danger. "I'd rather stay on the main highway," I said, trying to sound casual. He twisted in his seat, an edge creeping into his tone. "Trust me, it's faster. My brother's place is closer to the old route. We'll cut off at least 20 miles. My knuckles whitened on the wheel. "I'm familiar with this stretch, and I've never seen a turnoff that makes sense. We'll stick to 95. No. He stared at me for a long second, the air thickened with tension. Then he leaned back, nodding as if conceding. "Sure, whatever you say." The silence that followed pressed on my nerves. I kept glancing at the radio clock, telling myself we'd reach civilization soon. Maybe I'd drop him off at a more populous rest stop. Suddenly he spoke again, voice low and urgent. "Pull over?" My heart kicked. "What?" I said, "Pull over." he repeated, turning in his seat to face me. The overhead glow from the dash lit his face in stark shadows. His eyes gleamed in a way that made my skin crawl. Alarm bells clanged in my head. I'm not pulling over. We're in the middle of nowhere. He reached into his jacket pocket, and my stomach clenched. A moment later, he pulled out a knife, a short blade that glinted under the passing beams of the headlights. I felt my breath catch in my throat, a sudden dryness that made it hard to swallow. "Pull over now," he said, voice cold, "or you're going to regret it." Adrenaline surged, but I kept my hand steady on the wheel. "Please, you don't have to." He brought the blade closer to my face, not quite touching, but enough for me to feel the threat. "Shut up and pull off the road," he snarled. Heart hammering, I eased the car onto the shoulder, dust kicking up behind us. The desert loomed in all directions, lifeless and intimidating. Part of me screamed to hit the gas and outrun him, but the rational part pointed out that one swipe with that knife and I could crash. When we came to a stop, my mind whirled, looking for escape routes. The highway was utterly deserted. If I tried to run on foot, I'd be alone in the darkness, and he might catch me. He gestured with the knife toward my phone on the console. "Toss it here." I handed it over, my pulse in my ears. He flicked his gaze at the screen and turned it off. Next, he demanded my keys. I hesitated a moment too long, and he raised the blade again, pressing the tip against my shoulder. A sharp sting. "Don't make this harder," he hissed. I fumbled for the keys and handed them over. He shoved them into his jacket pocket, then nodded for me to get out of the car. My insides churned. Was he going to drive off with my vehicle and leave me stranded like Jordan Ellis in Kansas? Or was this something worse? I opened the door, stepping into the dry desert air. Gravel crunched under my sneakers. In the faint moonlight, I saw the emptiness around us, stretching for miles. Cole slid across to the driver's seat, his eyes never leaving me. "Now walk out there," he barked, waving the knife toward the desert. I backed away from my car, each step a struggle against panic. My mind raced. Could I outrun him? Did he have a gun, too? If I made a break for it, would he chase me? Then an idea flickered. I need to use the bathroom," I said, voice shaking. "I'm scared, okay? Just let me go behind that bush over there, please." His gaze narrowed. "You think I'm stupid?" I forced tears into my voice. "I'm a 50-year-old woman with a bladder that's not what it used to be. You want me to wet myself in your new car?" He paused, glancing at the seat as though imagining the mess. Finally, he grunted. "Fine, but be quick." I turned and walked toward a tumble of rocks maybe 20 yards away, trying not to look back. My heart hammered so loudly I could barely think. The second I was out of the direct glare of the headlights, I crouched low, pressing myself into the shadows. I needed to vanish, or at least buy enough time to run. Behind me, I heard him get out of the car. The door slam rattled across the silent desert. He muttered something, then shouted, "Hurry up." I stayed low, inching away, my palms slick with sweat. When he realized I wasn't coming back, he'd probably come after me, but if I kept creeping through the darkness, maybe I could slip around to the other side. I'd seen a stretch of rocky ground that could offer cover. A minute passed, then I heard his footsteps. He was heading in my direction, the beam of a small flashlight dancing across the rocks. Panicking, I scrambled behind a larger boulder. The rough surface scraped my arms, but I barely noticed. My entire focus was on not making a sound. He came closer. I could hear his labored breathing, see the shaky glow of the flashlight. "Hey!" he called, voice echoing off the rocks. "Don't be stupid." I inched sideways, hugging the shadows. Suddenly, the flashlight's beam swept over my shoulder. I ducked, heart pounding, and pressed myself tighter to the stone. The beam passed by. From the corner of my eye, I saw the highway beyond, the headlights of my car still illuminating the shoulder. If I could get to the road without him spotting me, maybe I'd have a chance to flag someone down. But there was no traffic in sight. Cole cursed under his breath, turning away to scan another patch of darkness. That was my chance. I rose to a half-crouch, darting behind another outcrop of rock, my lungs burning from adrenaline. The flashlight whipped back around, missing me by inches. He shouted again, but now he sounded further away, like he'd moved down a small slope. That was enough. I bolted, crossing the open stretch of gravel back toward the shoulder. My sneakers kicked up dust, and every footstep felt like a gunshot in the stillness. The moment I reached the asphalt, I sprinted down the road, ignoring the stitch in my side. I prayed he hadn't seen me. If he did, I was finished. He still had my keys, and that knife. I ran until my lungs begged for mercy. The desert seemed endless, but finally I spotted distant headlights cresting a rise. I could see distantly, but relief surged through me like a wave. I waved my arms frantically, tears streaming down my cheeks. The car slowed. Pickup, maybe, but as it drew closer, it accelerated, swerving to avoid me. Fear probably told the driver not to risk stopping for a wild-eyed woman in the middle of the road. I kept running. Another stretch of darkness, and another set of headlights appeared. This time, a battered RV approached, and I risked everything by jumping in front of it. The driver slammed the brakes, the tires screeching. I screamed, "Help, please!" The door opened, revealing an elderly couple. Their expressions were equal parts alarm and concern. I stumbled toward them, breathless, babbling about the man with the knife. The husband reached for a phone, but out here, the signal was spotty. They let me climb into the passenger seat, cranking the engine to drive us out of danger. As we sped away, we saw no sign of Cole. He could have been anywhere, searching for me in that desolate terrain. 15 minutes later, we found a tiny diner and managed to call the police. It took over an hour for a patrol car to arrive. When an officer finally picked me up, we scoured the highway for my car, but it was gone. At dawn, another unit found the vehicle, abandoned on a dirt track. The trunk was opened, revealing my suitcase rummaged through. Worse, they discovered Cole's duffel bag inside, stuffed with zip ties, duct tape, a roll of plastic sheeting, and a couple of knives. A sick chill washed over me at the thought of what he might have planned. I gave my statement, repeating every detail I could remember. His height, hair, the shape of the knife, the directions he'd tried to make me take. The police assured me they'd do their best, but they admitted that tracking someone down in the wide Nevada desert is like looking for a ghost. Weeks later, I still can't drive without glancing at my rear-view mirror every 30 seconds. Half expecting to see those eyes again. I feel lucky that I had an excuse to leave the car when I did, lucky that an old couple in an RV took a chance on me. Yet the nightmares persist. Replaying that moment, he pressed the knife against my shoulder. And as I scroll through headlines about other road trippers who weren't so lucky, I realize we're all part of a grim pattern. From Alex Carter's harrowing run-in with the black SUV to Kevin's narrow escape in Mississippi. The roads can be a haven for predators, especially when the rest of the world is asleep. Next time, I'll remember what happened on that highway in Nevada, and I'll know that the scariest thing about picking up a passenger is that you may not realize they never intended to leave. In the aftermath of Melissa Tran's harrowing ordeal on that desert highway in Nevada, the whispers about roadside terrors only seemed to grow louder. I caught wind of her story in a local news podcast, one of those episodes where the host breathlessly recounts recent horrors plaguing America's most desolate stretches of pavement. She was lucky to escape, the host said, unlike so many others who disappear without a trace. That thought lingered in my mind, a grim little echo of what if. That echo became deafening when I found myself cruising through the West Virginia mountains, accompanied by my two best friends, Derek and Sam. I'm Tyler Mendoza, a 22-year-old college student, and I'd always thought of road trips as an escape from campus stress. Midterms, term papers, the endless grind of lectures. So when Derek announced he'd inherited a battered Jeep Cherokee from his uncle, Sarah, we decided to break it in with a weekend trip. Sam was up for anything, and I wanted a last hurrah before finals. The plan? Drive from our university in Morgantown down to a cabin near Seneca Rocks. A couple of hours ride, scenic views, some fishing, maybe a bonfire. Easy. We had no clue that we'd stumble into something straight out of a nightmare. We set off on a Friday afternoon, the Jeep rattling like it was held together by duct tape and prayers. But Derek was proud of it, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel to some grunge playlist blasting from his phone. The roads were winding but familiar. Blue sky overhead, a crisp breeze carrying the scent of pine. Sam lounged in the back seat, occasionally snapping photos of the rolling hills. I sat shotgun, flipping through local radio stations or checking the GPS to make sure we were on track. Everything changed just past twilight. The day's light faded, and we found ourselves on a narrower highway that carved through dense forests. The sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the horizon in deep oranges and purples. We were maybe 30 miles from the cabin, fantasizing about s'mores and cheap beer, when we noticed headlights weaving erratically behind us. I glanced over my shoulder. "Derek, slow down. Looks like some maniac is tailgating." He peeked in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, I see it. Old pickup, maybe? Hard to tell." We let the Jeep drift closer to the shoulder, hoping the truck would pass. Instead, it swerved violently to one side, high beams flashing. Then, just as quickly, it dropped back, headlights flicking off as if the driver had killed them entirely. We could see a faint outline of the truck's shape, black against the darkening sky. An old-style pickup, the kind you'd expect in an antique car show. "Maybe their lights are busted," Sam offered, leaning between the front seats. "Seems more like they're messing with us," Derek muttered. Unease prickled up my spine. After hearing all those stories, Alex Carter in Arizona, Jordan Ellis left stranded in Kansas, and especially Melissa's near miss in Nevada, I knew better than to dismiss strange behavior on a lonely road. "Let's just get to the cabin," I suggested. "We're not that far." Derek nodded and pressed the gas. The engine groaned, but we picked up speed. The truck behind us, however, matched our pace. At times it dropped back far enough that its headlights vanished. At other times, it roared close enough that I could practically feel the heat of its engine. I flicked the side mirror to night mode, trying to minimize the glare, but the sense of being watched, of being pursued, only grew stronger. Eventually, the pickup swung wide, its headlights flaring to life in our mirrors, and surged alongside us. For a moment, we were window to window. The truck looked ancient. Chipped paint, rusted edges, a front grille that glinted in the moonlight like a sneer. Inside, the cab was too dark to see a driver's face, just shadows. Then, without warning, it cut back behind us in a swerve so abrupt that Derek nearly swerved himself to avoid a collision. "Holy!" Sam shouted, bracing himself against the seats. "Enough of this," Derek growled, knuckles white on the wheel. "I'm pulling over if we find a spot with people around." But that was the problem. We were out in the middle of nowhere, just winding roads and towering pines. The few tiny towns we passed were already dark, main streets empty. The local motels and diners had turned off their neon signs hours ago. About an hour into this cat-and-mouse game, we took a sharp turn around a mountain bend, and suddenly the headlights vanished. One moment the truck was looming close behind us, the next it was gone. We scanned every mirror, slowed our speed. Nothing. Sam even peered out the back window, pressing his face to the glass. "You think we lost them?" he asked in a hushed tone. Derek let out a shaky breath. "Maybe it turned off somewhere. Good riddance." I wasn't so sure. My gut twisted, telling me that a truck that persistent doesn't just vanish. But we breathed easier for the next 20 minutes. The road dipped into a valley, following a stretch of river. The moonlight glinted off the water like molten silver. We started talking about the cabin again, joking about roasting marshmallows. Then we saw it. Parked on a narrow pull-off at the side of the road, as if waiting for us. The same battered old pickup. This time its headlights were off, the interior dark. A chill shot through me as we passed. Derek eased off the gas, and I strained to look inside. No driver, no passengers. It was like the truck had been abandoned. "This is weird," Sam whispered. "Keep driving," I muttered, a trembling in my voice. We sped on, leaving that eerie scene in our wake. My mind raced. How had it gotten ahead of us? Had we missed a side road that cut across the mountains? Was someone playing a twisted game? The highway wound higher, deeper into the forest. Our GPS started glitching, losing signal, the screen flickering in and out. As we climbed a ridge, Derek cursed. "We're low on gas, guys. I didn't think we'd burn this much. If we don't hit a station soon, we might be screwed. Sam suggested we veer off onto a smaller road that, according to the map, led to a minor county route. Might be a quicker way to find a station, he said. I glanced at the old, half-functional GPS. The route was faint, but it did indicate some small towns on the far side of the mountain range. We don't have many options, I admitted. We either risk it on the main road with no guarantee of a station, or we try this route. So we took the detour. It turned into a twisting, narrow dirt road that our Jeep could barely handle. Loose gravel crunched beneath the tires. The overhead canopy of branches blotted out most of the moonlight. I kept expecting to see the truck's headlights appear in our rear view, but the darkness behind us stayed empty. We drove slowly for half an hour, hearts pounding every time the path dipped or curved. It was nerve-wracking, but strangely peaceful, too. At least there was no sign of that phantom pickup. Eventually, we came to a fork in the road. Both directions looked equally deserted. We picked the left path, which snaked upward again, hugging a cliff face. That's when our headlights illuminated a strange shape a few yards ahead. Something was blocking the road. "Is that a fallen tree?" Sam asked, squinting. We rolled closer. No, it wasn't a tree, it was the truck. The same battered pickup, parked sideways across the dirt track, effectively creating a barricade. Our beams lit up the rust patterns, the shattered passenger window. The sight made my stomach lurch. Derek brought the Jeep to a stop, maybe 10 feet away. The engine idled, and for a moment none of us spoke. I felt a primal fear gnaw at me, the kind that comes from realizing you're cornered. Sam leaned over the back seat, groping for a flashlight. "What do we do?" he whispered. Derek's voice trembled. "We turn around. Now!" But the dirt track was narrow, the drop-off on one side steep. We'd need to perform a complicated three-point turn. Derek shifted into reverse, carefully backing up. The Jeep's tires skidded on loose gravel. My pulse pounded so hard that my vision blurred at the edges. We managed to swing the front end toward the other fork in the road. That's when the Jeep's headlights blinked out for a fraction of a second, like a power surge or a short circuit. Everything went pitch black. My heart nearly stopped. In that moment of darkness, I thought I saw movement near the truck. Something tall, stepping out from behind the tailgate. Then the lights flickered back on, and the figure was gone. Or maybe I'd imagined it. Derek stomped the gas, and we sped back down the way we'd come. The dirt road curved violently, the Jeep fishtailing. Behind us, no headlights followed. The trees flew by in a blur of shadows and twisting branches. Adrenaline surged, my thoughts spinning. How had that truck gotten here? Who was behind it? What did they want? We finally returned to the main highway, relieved to be on asphalt again. Night pressed in on us, the forest a dark mass on all sides. Derek aimed for the cabin's general direction, saying we'd better chance running out of gas than risk the back roads again. Sam kept twisting in his seat, glancing out the rear window. "I don't see it," he kept saying, voice quivering. "It's not behind us." But that was little comfort. The next 20 minutes crawled by. Every muscle in my body tensed for the moment those headlights reappeared. Yet the road stayed empty. My chest tightened, half expecting the truck to materialize around every bend. We reached a sign that pointed to Seneca Rocks, only 5 miles away. Relief flooded me. We'd be safe at the cabin. Or so I thought. Up ahead, the road curved around a rocky outcrop. My gaze followed the bend, searching for that truck's silhouette, but there was nothing. Derek started to laugh, the sound tinged with hysteria. "Guess we lost them," he said. Sam let out a shaky sigh. I was about to reply when the Jeep jerked to one side. For a horrible instant, I thought Derek had fallen asleep or lost control. But no, the steering wheel was locked. The headlights blinked once more, and in that split second of darkness, I heard Derek scream. Then we saw it, directly in front of us, the same battered pickup. It hadn't been there a split second earlier. The Jeep careened sideways, tires squealing as Derek wrenched the wheel. The last thing I remember is the sickening crunch of metal and the Jeep flipping. I woke at dawn, sprawled in a bed of wet leaves. The early light filtered through the pines, a gentle golden hue. My head throbbed, my clothes torn. My mouth tasted blood and dirt. My first thought was Derek and Sam. Where were they? I sat up, searching frantically. The Jeep lay on its side a few yards away, the windshield caved in, steam curling from a cracked radiator. No sign of Derek or Sam anywhere. I shouted their names until my throat felt raw, stumbling around the crash site. I found Sam's phone on the ground, the screen shattered, but no sign of him. Derek's jacket lay draped over a fallen branch, but no footprints led away. Then I saw it, dusty tire tracks leading deeper into the woods, as though a vehicle had somehow maneuvered around the wreck. My pulse thundered. The old pickup must have driven off the main road and vanished among the trees. But how? The terrain looked impassable for a standard truck. A wave of dizziness hit me, and I staggered against the Jeep, calling my friends' names again. Nothing, just the rustle of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. Eventually I heard voices, a search party. Turned out a hiker had spotted the overturned Jeep from a ridge and alerted the authorities. They found me stumbling in circles, half delirious. The local sheriff, a grizzled man with kind eyes, asked me question after question. Where are your friends? Who was in the pickup truck? Did you see a driver? My head pounded, and the only answers I could give sounded insane even to me. That the truck appeared and disappeared at will, that it seemed to materialize on the road. The search extended for days. Police dogs, volunteers, helicopters scanning from above. They found no trace of Sam or Derek. No footprints, no torn clothing, nothing. Even the tire tracks leading into the woods vanished after a few yards, like they'd never existed at all. News outlets picked up the story. Some speculated it was a kidnapping, others spun wild theories about a ghost truck haunting the West Virginia hills. But no one found a shred of evidence. I stayed in the hospital for a while, recovering from a concussion and minor fractures. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see the truck's battered grille, the headlights flaring, and then blackness. Weeks later, I returned to the crash site with a small group of volunteers. We scoured the woods with flashlights, calling out Derek and Sam's names until our voices cracked. All we found were scraps of metal and a single muddy shoe. No license plate, no sign of an old pickup hidden in the forest. People ask me, could it have been carjackers? Some local criminals? But that doesn't explain how the truck vanished and reappeared, or why there was no driver in sight, or how it managed to block the dirt road before we even got there. The simplest explanation is that we were hunted by something, or someone, who knows these mountains better than any law enforcement ever could. I'm still in therapy, trying to piece together the fragments of that night. The authorities won't call off the search for Derek and Sam entirely, but they're not optimistic. Sometimes I see them on the news, photos smiling from college IDs, described as missing. I can't bear the guilt. I was there. I survived. They didn't. All I know is that wherever that truck came from, it left with my friends. And every time I hear about these road trip nightmares, like the ones Alex, Jordan, Nicole, Kevin, and Melissa experienced, I feel a pang of recognition. Because sometimes the horror isn't just about criminals lurking on the highways. Sometimes it's something far stranger, a piece of the unknown that slips in and out of our world without warning. That battered old pickup, it's out there somewhere in these mountains, waiting for the next set of headlights to cross its path. And if you ever find yourself driving a deserted West Virginia highway, far from help, keep your eyes open. You never know when it might appear in your rearview mirror, just before everything goes dark. After chronicling these 6 harrowing tales, each one an unexpected brush with danger on America's lonely highways, I can't help but feel there's a common thread running through all of them. From Alex Carter's relentless pursuer on Route 19 to Tyler Mendoza's mysterious vanishing convoy in the West Virginia mountains, each protagonist discovered that the open road can be as isolating and threatening as it is freeing. A key lesson that emerges is the importance of trusting your instincts. Every individual, whether it's Jordan Ellis hesitating to let a stranger into his car, or Melissa Tran sensing something off about that last-minute shortcut, had a split second of warning, a gut feeling that something wasn't right. In most cases, the difference between getting away and getting trapped hinged on whether they chose to listen to that inner alarm or ignore it. We often brush aside unease as paranoia, but these stories remind us that erring on the side of caution can save your life. Another lesson is to prepare before heading out. Keep your vehicle in good condition, have a phone charger, let someone know your travel route, and research rest stops or motels along the way. Many of these dire situations arose from stopping in remote areas where help was miles away. Even a simple plan for where to spend the night can protect you from the worst-case scenarios that befall those who have no choice but to pull over and sleep in their cars. Finally, the importance of community and kindness shouldn't be overlooked. Though the dark side of humanity features prominently in these tales, it was often the intervention of a passing trucker, an older couple in an RV, or a well-intentioned gas station clerk that saved the day. The roads can be cruel, but they're also full of good Samaritans. The trick is knowing when someone genuinely needs help and when they're setting a trap. On behalf of the Enigma of the Unknown channel, I want to thank you for listening to these cautionary road trip stories. Your time and attention mean the world to us, and I hope these accounts sharpen your senses and add a layer of awareness to your future travels. If there's one takeaway, it's that a deserted highway can feel like a world unto itself. Beautiful, yet deeply unforgiving. Stay prepared, stay vigilant, and never underestimate the power of a single decision when you're out there on the open road. Thank you again for tuning in. Your support and engagement help us continue exploring the unknown, sharing these chilling tales, and ensuring that no traveler ever has to feel completely alone when the road ahead grows dark. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the worst horrors aren't conjured by imagination, but by the very real dangers lurking just around the next bend. Safe travels, everyone.